Hey, if you have a Bible, let me tell you where you can meet me. We are going to be in Jonah chapter 4 today. Jonah is a book in the Old Testament, a small book, and so the best way to find it is to use the table of contents. If you didn't bring a Bible with you, there are some paperback ones down the ends of your row, and someone will slide that down to you, and you can locate the book of Jonah. It has a table of contents in the front. You can also Google Jonah 4, Jonah 4, on your smartphone. And if you're looking at your phone, we will just assume that the Bible's on there. Football doesn't start until next week, and so there's no need to look at the phone unless the Bible's there, at least for another week. That's just how we roll on Sunday mornings. And as you're getting turned there, today is our last time together in this book of Jonah. We're going to finish up this series that we started a few weeks ago. And I've had some great conversations with many of you about what this book has birthed in you and the thoughts and the questions that it's raised and the conversations that you guys are having together about this book. And today we're going to finish with just one question. What has this book been about? What's been the big point of this whole thing? And the first thing I want you to notice is that it has been first and foremost a book about God, who He is and what He's like. That's why we just prayed that God would show us who He is and what He's like. Now, even if you have never read the Bible and you didn't know anything about the story of Jonah and you were just to open this up and to start reading, you would encounter a very distinct picture of God in the first two verses of this book. It began like this back in chapter 1. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, "Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it, for their evil has come up before me." Jonah was a Jewish prophet, and normally a Jewish prophet would speak on behalf of the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob to other Jewish people. But here, God calls the prophet to go to Nineveh. Nineveh was a city about 500 miles northeast of Jerusalem. It was the biggest city of the Assyrian Empire, which was the dominant world power of the day. And it was a very big and a very important city. That's why God calls it that great city. But it was decidedly not Jewish, nor did it worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But God calls this Jewish prophet to go there and to give them His word. Now, think about what this means about this God. With this very mission, He is claiming to be Lord of people who have never even acknowledged Him. This God is claiming authority over all people, even the Ninevites. So this God refuses to be a little tribal deity. He refuses to be just a little local Jewish God, which means whether you worship Him or not, whether you've heard of Him or not, whether you've acknowledged Him or not, He claims to be your Lord. Look at verse 2 again. "Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, call out against it, for their evil has come up before me." This is also a God who has piercing moral clarity. The Assyrians were known for their brutal ways of conquering their enemies. God calls them what they are, evil. So this book begins with a God who has a clear vision of what is good and what is evil, and a God who is not content to assert that vision on just a small local level, but a God who extends His lordship over all the earth, a God who has no boundaries. And right here, 2 verses into the book, we've run into a significant obstacle for many people. Now, if you're a follower of Jesus, if you've read the scriptures for a long time, you might have just read right past that and thought, well, yeah, of course, that's what God does. He's a capital L Lord. He calls good things good and evil things evil. That's just what He does. But many people who have never encountered this God look at this and say, if that's what God is like, I want nothing to do with Him. I simply can't deal with a God who claims that kind of authority, a God whose boundaries don't exist. Now, there's a second related problem that people often have. It's a little different, but it's related. They would say a God who claims exclusive authority over all people everywhere is a dangerous God, because what kind of followers of God would that create? I mean, wouldn't this produce people who are narrow and exclusive, if this God calls people to himself and says, I, the one Lord of all the earth, have called you, and I've revealed myself to you, and I've shown myself to you, and I've given you my word, and I've told you what is good and what is evil. Now you have inside knowledge to this one true God. Wouldn't that produce narrow and exclusive people? Wouldn't that produce people who think it's their prerogative to judge everyone else and to pronounce on everyone else their version of what is good and what is evil? This is a major fear that people have about religion in our culture, not just about Christianity, but about all religions. That religion creates people who think of themselves as the insiders and everyone else as the outsiders, and because of their religion, they begin to hate, they even begin to believe that God has sanctioned them to judge the outsiders. Now, we need to have those questions in mind when we finish the book of Jonah. Does believing in a God who is Lord of heaven and earth cause you to become narrow and exclusive? Does believing in a God who calls good, good, and evil, evil, cause you to become intolerant? Does believing in a God who judges cause you to become judgmental? Is belief in this kind of God bad for people and bad for society? Let's bring those questions to Jonah chapter 4. Now, if you're just joining us, here's the story so far. Instead of going to Nineveh as God asked him, called him, instructed him to do, Jonah tries to sail 2,500 miles across the Mediterranean Sea in the opposite direction to a place called Tarshish. And he never quite made it there because God pursued him. Remember, this is a God who is not good with boundaries. And so you can't really run from him. There's like nowhere you can go from his presence. And so God kind of demonstrated that to Jonah. He pursued him, and he cornered him, and he had him thrown into the sea. And then he appointed a great fish, or the Hebrew literally reads, sea creature, to swallow him up. And this was not to kill him, but to preserve him. This sea creature was like a timeout for Jonah. That was chapter 1. And during his fish timeout, Jonah did some reconsidering, as you might do if you find yourself in the belly of a large sea creature and you realize you're still alive. You might do some reconsidering. And he turned back to the Lord. And the Lord commanded the fish to vomit him back onto the dry land. That was chapter 2. And then sometime later, the word of the Lord came to him a second time. Here's how chapter 3 began. Then the word of the Lord came to Jonah the second time, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it the message that I tell you. And this time Jonah obeyed. He went to Nineveh. And his message went like this: Yet 40 days, and Nineveh will be overthrown. That was chapter 3. But the surprising twist at the end of chapter 3 is that Nineveh repented of their evil, and they acknowledged this Lord who claimed authority over him. And so chapter 3 ended like this. When God saw what they did, how they turned from their evil way, God relented of the disaster that he said he would do to them, and he did not do it. Now, the story should have ended right there. Jonah had his time out, and he came back to God. The Ninevites got a warning, and they came and acknowledged the Lord of heaven and earth. It should have ended right there, and everyone lived happily ever after. That should have been the end of the story, and then Jesus comes. But it didn't end there. The story continues in chapter 4, and it continues like this in chapter 4, verse 1. But it displeased Jonah exceedingly, and he was angry. God, relenting from the disaster that he said he would do to Nineveh, displeased Jonah exceedingly, and he was angry. And he prayed to the Lord and said, O Lord, is not this what I said when I was yet in my country? This is why I made haste to flee to Tarshish, for I knew that you are a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and relenting from disaster. Therefore now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live. And the Lord said, Do you do well to be angry? Remember our question. Does believing in a God who is Lord of heaven and earth cause you to become narrow and exclusive? Does believing in a God who judges cause people to become judgmental? Does believing that you know the difference between good and evil cause people to become judgmental and angry? And the answer is, it could. It sometimes does. Jonah is proof. The concern that so many people have about religion, especially the kind that claims there's one God who made everything and all people owe him worship, the concern that people have that creates narrow people, that concern is well-founded. And if your reason for not believing in Christianity or this God is that, now you have the Bible on your side. Because this very book of Jonah raises the question, why do people who believe in the one true God sometimes become so judgmental? Why do people who see so clearly the difference between good and evil sometimes become angry? In fact, notice, Jonah doesn't just believe in the one true God, nor does he just believe that this God judges good and evil. He also believes that this God is gracious and merciful and slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. But even this belief is not enough to save him from the great danger of religion. While believing in exclusively God, you become an excluder. While believing in God the judge, you become judgmental. Why would anyone want to become a Christian if this could happen to you? Now, the story continues in verse 5. Jonah went out of the city and sat to the east of the city and made a booth for himself there. He sat under it in the shade till he should see what would become of the city. Now, after preaching his message, yet 40 days and Nineveh shall be overthrown, Jonah had gone outside the city to see what would happen, and he's waiting and watching outside for the overthrow that never comes. He made himself a booth, which was a little temporary shelter made often of like leafy branches and straw and sticks. In the Boy Scouts, we called it making a lean-to. You make a lean-to when you take a log and you lean it up against a tree, and then you cover one side of the little thing you've made with branches and leaves, lean-to. So Jonah just earned his wilderness survival merit badge, which you need to become a first-class scout. But apparently, his little lean-to is not providing enough shade because God is going to help him out in verse 6. Here's how it goes. Now the Lord appointed a plant and made it come up over Jonah, that it might be a shade over his head to save him from his discomfort. So Jonah was exceedingly glad because of the plant. In that part of the world, it probably happens in our part of the world too. In that part of the world, there was a fast-growing plant or weed that could grow several feet high in just a day. And God makes one of those things to grow up over Jonah's head. And Jonah is going to become emotionally attached to this plant. Down in verse 10, God will say, "You pity the plant." Now, we sometimes use pity in a condescending way, thanks largely to the massive cultural influence of Mr. T. So we say, "I pity the fool who," and that doesn't mean I really feel sorry for you. That just means like, you're a fool, and I'm just saying, I pity you. But pity in its original form is not a condescending word. It means to feel compassion for someone, usually because of their suffering, to feel compassion for them. And when you pity someone or you feel compassion for them, you've become emotionally connected to them so that when they suffer, you suffer. When things go bad for them, your own heart sinks. Yesterday, I talked to a friend who had done something foolish and was suffering as a result. And my own heart just kind of sank when he told me the news. Jonah has become emotionally connected to a plant. Now, but before you scoff at him, recognize we all have the capacity to get emotionally attached to inanimate objects. Like, I've only owned 3 cars in my adult life, and the second one was the worst of the 3 in terms of reliability or sex appeal or really anything you look for in a car, even stability on the snow. So if you're looking for a car, I would strongly advise you to avoid the 2000 Nissan Maxima. But when it started dying a few years ago, I was seriously bummed because I had bought it during a very transitional and kind of vulnerable point in my life. I had just taken what felt like a huge risk to transition out of this stable career and go back to school. And so I felt acutely during that season of my life how utterly dependent I am on God to provide everything I ever need. And then I moved here to start this church, and that felt even more risky and vulnerable. So this car was my transportation through all those little stages and transitions of life. And so it just kind of represented God's kindness to me, like His always taking care of me, how He provides for me. We've been through so much together. I completed seminary in that car. I moved to Denver in that car. Once that car crossed into Colorado, it never drove across the state line again. It came here to die. It was like a traditional Western settler who just comes here, gets exhausted, and dies. And when it died, I felt incredibly sad. I started thinking about all we had been through together, of all it represented. I got a little sad as someone drove off in it for a couple $1,000s. Now, I know you've done that with something, a house or a car or a backpack you travel the world in or a dress. It's more than a thing to you. There's an emotional connection because your life has been bound up with its life. Jonah loves this plant like that. His life and its life have become bound up together. Verse 7. But when dawn came up the next day, God appointed a worm that attacked the plant so that it withered. When the sun rose, God appointed a scorching east wind, and the sun beat down on the head of Jonah so that he was faint. And he asked that he might die and said, "It's better for me to die than to live." But God said to Jonah, "Do you do well to be angry for the plant?" And he said, "Yes, I do well to be angry, angry enough to die." And the Lord said, "You pity the plant for which you do not labor, nor did you make it grow, which came into being in a night and perished in a night. And should I not pity Nineveh, that great city in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left hand, and also much cattle?" Drop the mic into the book. Now, what is that about? What is this book about? It'd be easy to say, well, God's trying to teach Jonah some compassion. And that would be generally right. But that's too simple of a summary because, as we've already seen, Jonah is already capable of compassion. He does already have the capacity to feel pity. He pities the plant, just like I've pitied the Nissan. So God is not just trying to teach Jonah what compassion is and how he can feel it and how he can develop capacity for it. He's comparing his own compassion with Jonah's. Two people, if you will, in this story have compassion. Both God and Jonah have compassion, but their compassion is very different. That's the point. Now, the comparison starts in the last two verses. God asks in verse 11, "Should I not pity Nineveh, that great city, in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left hand?" You pity a plant, I pity a city with 120,000 persons. Plant versus people. One plant versus 120,000 people, and also much cattle. Now, what's up with the cattle? Now, surely God has compassion for animals. Surely that's true, but that's not probably the point here. Cattle in ancient cultures represented wealth because the economy was tied to livestock. And so as you stored up wealth, you stored it up usually in the form of livestock. That was your estate. If you read through the Old Testament, when God would pour out his blessings on one of the patriarchs, it would also just tell you how many cattle he had and how much livestock they had. And that would be the equivalent of saying today, he had a lot of money, or his stocks grew really, really valuable. His portfolio was expanding. So the cattle were the economy, represented the economy of Nineveh. This is yet another reference to Nineveh's greatness and its importance and its influence, because Nineveh was the cultural and the economic center of the whole Assyrian Empire. It was the cultural and economic influencer of that whole region and corner of the world. So if God is gracious to spare Nineveh, he's being gracious to everyone in Nineveh's orbit. So God cares about this vast empire called Assyria. It would be like saying, I don't just care about Los Angeles, I care about the whole western part of the U.S. That's how massive God's compassion is. So here's a question. Why can Jonah pity a plant that's here today and gone tomorrow, and can't pity a city full of people that influences a whole corner of the world that's full of people? And consider, why did Jonah have compassion for the plant? Look at verse 10. The Lord said, "You pity the plant for which you did not labor." The term labor literally means to work and to suffer. It means to work and to sweat in order to see something flourish. There's a reason we call giving birth to a baby labor, because it is painful and it is sweaty and it is bloody, and it is all to give birth in life to this little fragile life so that little fragile life can flourish. And what happens when you give birth? Like literally the mother's life and the baby's life are literally bound up together. They are literally and physically joined together. And then when that baby comes, that mother, having labored for that baby, feels deep, deep compassion for that child. She is incredibly protective. She is incredibly sensitive to that baby's needs. When that baby is in pain, she is in pain. When that baby is happy, she is happy. But Jonah didn't labor for this plant, so that surely can't be the reason that he pities it. Verse 10 also says, "You pity the plant for which you did not labor, nor did you make it grow." Make it grow literally means to raise it. It's often used for how parents raise children. Raising children is a form of labor, right? It's a form of sweat and pain, and sometimes you got to cuss, right? And when one of those children suffers, you suffer because you're emotionally connected to those children. Parents will sometimes say, "I am only as happy as my most unhappy child." The more you invest in raising them, the more connected to them you feel. If they suffer, you suffer. But Jonah did not raise this plant, so that can't be why he feels compassion for it. So he didn't sweat for it, he didn't labor for it, he didn't suffer for it, he didn't raise it. That only leaves one option. He pities the plant because it benefits him. Jonah forms an emotional attachment to whatever does good to him. Now again, before you mock him, consider, this is normal. This is how most of us love. We care about people who care about us, and we love people who are good to us. We even love cars and dresses and houses and dogs and hiking boots that treat us well. When our life has been bound up with them, we feel attached. Now compare that to God. Why does God have compassion on Nineveh? Because Nineveh does good to him? Nineveh doesn't even worship him. Does God have compassion on them because they're just incredibly beautiful people and he's naively in love with them? God is no naive romantic about Nineveh. Have you ever been naively in love? You're like so smitten with someone, and because you're smitten with them, you kind of don't see the dark parts. That happens when you can see some legitimately beautiful part of the beloved. Maybe it's their beauty or their confidence or their sense of humor or their status or just how cool they are or just how fun they are to be with. But you overlook the dark spots. God's no naive romantic about Nineveh. He sees clearly who they are. They are a people who are made in his image. They are persons So they have inherent dignity and inherent worth. Surely God sees that, but he also sees the dark side. He told Jonah, "Go and call out against them, for their evil has come up before me." He called them that great city where there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left hand. That is an idiom for morally confused. They are morally confused. That's part of the fall. Part of the fall is that we tend to call evil things good and good things evil. Part of the fall is that our loves are disordered, so we will see something beautiful and we will love it, but we will love it more than we should love something that is more beautiful than that. So we'll get more attached, for example, to a plant, which is legitimately beautiful. God made plants. They're an expression of his creativity and beauty. But we'll love plants more than we love people. See, the problem is not that you love a plant. The problem is that you don't love the people. And so your loves are disordered. That's called not knowing your right hand from your left hand. We'll get outraged at certain injustices that happen in our world, and certain other injustices will occur, and we will kind of look the other way at those. That's called not knowing your right hand from your left hand. And God sees that clearly about Nineveh. These people are incredibly confused. Their loves are disordered. They call evil things good, and they call good things evil. So God can't love the people of Nineveh because they're good people or because they're good to him. And yet, he's saying to Jonah, I feel attached to them. I feel connected. So if they suffer, he suffers. He has compassion on them. In fact, his indictment of Jonah, you love the plant for which you did not labor, nor did you make it grow, that indictment implies that God does labor over Nineveh and he does raise Nineveh. They are people created in his image like children who are difficult. And he's labored over them, he's sweated over them, he's suffered over them, and he's done this of his own free will. He hasn't done this because they are good and he sees all the goodness and beauty in them and he just wants to affirm how beautiful they are. He loves them out of this overflow, out of the very essence of his being that moves toward them with compassion so that when they suffer, he feels it, and when they do evil, it not only makes God angry, it makes him sad. So here's the pattern. Jonah has formed an emotional bond with a plant because it's good for him. And God cares about Nineveh, not because they're good or they do good or they bring him any benefit, but because he has labored over them freely out of the overflow of his own goodness. His own inner life is love. We did a whole sermon on that back at the beginning of the year. We did a series in John chapter 3, verse 16, the most famous verse in the Bible. And it begins like this: for God so loved the world. And we said, when you know what world means, you have to go, where does this love of God come from? And we did a whole sermon on how it comes out of his own intertrinitarian life. It's one of the most incredible teachings of Scripture. I would encourage you to go back and listen if this is a new idea to you. He freely feels and directs his compassion toward them, which means that Jonah's compassion and God's compassion are of two different kinds altogether. One is merely loving something that does good to you, and the other is a free kind of love that wants to do good even when they haven't done good to you. So what's the point of this story? God is trying to convert Jonah to his kind of compassion. He's not just trying to convince him of it, he's trying to convert him in his soul to this kind of compassion. In fact, God has been freely doing good to Jonah throughout. Sometimes he does good to Jonah by doing what Jonah would call good. Sometimes he does good to Jonah by giving him pleasure, like, you need some shade, I'll grow a plant. But sometimes he does good to Jonah by disciplining him, by chasing him down, by sinking him in the sea, by killing the plant that he loves. But it's always God's goodness and it's always God's mercy to Jonah because he's pursuing Jonah's soul and his heart. So God is passionately committed to Jonah's conversion. Now here's the lesson then that this book begins to confront us with. You can know the God who is Lord of heaven and earth. You can believe all the right things about this God. You can profess that he is Lord. You can know that he is the judge. You can even know that he's gracious and merciful and slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. But until you have his compassion for other people, until you've been converted from you do good to me, I do good to you, until you've been converted from that scheme, you don't really know this God. You don't really represent his heart. That's what this book is all about. It's about what God is like, and it asks us, do you know him? And if you claim to, do you have his heart for the world? By the way, Jesus was always pressing this issue. Here's Jesus in his most famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5. He said to his disciples, you heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. To be a son is to be like someone. You can be like your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. He does good to good people and good to evil people. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Now, how could you possibly pray for your enemies? You could only pray for your enemies if you have the heart for your enemies that God has for your enemies, which is the same heart that God had for the Ninevites. So this book stands right in the middle of the scriptures as a caution about the slippery slope of religion. The slippery slope slides like this. You can have truth and you can know the one true God, but then you begin to feel superior to others who don't. And so you pull away from them, and in pulling away from them there is distance, and that distance breeds unfamiliarity, which breeds contempt, until you passively give into or you actively contribute to the marginalization of other groups of people because you don't really have God's heart for them. But this book also stands as an invitation. In fact, the closing question of this book is like an invitation to all of us. Should I not pity Nineveh, that great city, in which there are more than 120,000 persons who did not know their right hand from their left, and also much cattle? That stands like an invitation into God's heart. Now, if the callousness and the hatred of Jonah begins with distance, how do you develop this compassion like God has? You coming close voluntarily to someone who is different, to someone who you would say they don't know their right hand from their left hand. You get to know them. You understand them. You invest your life in them. You labor with them and over them. You sweat with them until your heart becomes like God's heart. This is what God is trying to teach his people through this book. I don't just want you to know those other people from a distance. I want you to go to them. See, that's why I called you to go. And when you go, I don't want you to maintain your distance. I want you to go in and see them and to know them and to sweat over them and to labor over them and to love them and to be connected to them. Connect your life to them like I've connected my life to you and to them. Man, my prayer for all of you, my hope for all of us, is that we would all be able to say, I have at least one person in my life who I'm sweating over and I'm laboring over. One person who doesn't know this God, one person who is confused about this God, one person who doesn't know their right hand from their left hand, one person who would not hear his word and think it was good. But I'm laboring over them. And I'm not just laboring from a distance, I'm laboring up close because my life and their life are connected. I sweat over them. I feel compassion over them. I feel what God feels for them. And the only way you can do that is to come in close. Man, this is why we say the hope of our church is to see a gospel movement that fills our city with disciples of Jesus. And then we go, well, how would we do that? And the very first habit we teach you guys is work hard. Work hard to love and understand people. Do you hear what we're saying there? We're saying labor. We're saying sweat. We're saying come in close and put your life close to people and work hard to love them and to understand them and to feel a measure of what God feels for them, which is, by the way, the same thing that he feels for you. It is the same compassion he's had on you. Work hard to love and understand them. Well, this is what God is like. That's what this book is showing us. This is what he's like. In fact, we have an even better picture of what God is like than the book of Jonah, because the clearest revelation of God is Jesus himself. And what did Jesus do? He came in close and he bonded himself to us. In fact, he didn't just kind of come close, he actually took on humanity. The God who made the world, the Word, the eternal Word, became flesh and dwelt among us. He took on humanity. And having taken on humanity, he then went to a cross. And when he went to a cross, he joined himself to us not only in our humanity, but also in our sinfulness. He joined himself to our sin. He joined himself to our guilt. He joined himself to our shame. And he took it to a cross. He joined himself to our judgment. The God who is Lord of heaven and earth and will judge heaven and earth and will bring a kingdom where righteousness reigns. In order to bring that kingdom where righteousness reigns, he's going to have to judge the world. This God, before he does that, he becomes one of us. He dwells among us and he takes on humanity and he takes on our sin and our shame and he takes on our judgment and he goes to a cross. At the end of the service, we sing this song. Today, we sing this song. It goes like this. Come behold the wondrous mystery in the dawning of the King, the theme of heaven's praises, robed in frail humanity. In our longing, in our darkness, now the light of life has come. Look to Christ who condescended, took on flesh to ransom us. So he came and he claimed to be the Lord. He said, one day everyone will worship me. One day every knee will bow to me. He claimed to be the way to know the Father. He had piercing moral clarity. In fact, the people who thought they knew their right hand from their left hand, the highly religious, law-observant people of Jesus' day, man, Jesus had such piercing moral clarity. He was like, man, you guys don't even know your right hand from your left hand. But that's not all he was known for. He wasn't just known for audacious claims to be the Lord. He wasn't just known for his claim that he's going to one day return and judge the living and the dead. He wasn't just known for his penetrating moral insight. He was also known for this. This is how his disciples experienced him. Matthew chapter 9. Jesus went throughout all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. And then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, earnestly pray to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. What kind of laborers do you think Jesus envisions? He doesn't envision laborers who stay distant. He doesn't envision laborers who maintain disdain. He envisions laborers who have the same compassion that he had. And he said, you know what, guys? When you move in with compassion, there are so many people, plentiful, so many people that are drawn to this God. This is what God is like. Let's pray together. Father, I thank you for this incredible picture that you give us of yourself in the book of Jonah, and that you also give us in the incarnation and the death and the resurrection of Jesus. I pray that you would help us to not only see what you are like, but to love what you are like, and to love what you are like in a way that we want to be made to what you are like. So we pray for those of us who know you, we pray that you would give us at least one person who we could say, I feel what God feels for them. I have the compassion that God has for them. I labor over them in some small measure like God himself labors and sweats over them. And Father, for those here who don't yet know you, I pray that they would see this is what you're like. You are a God who is Lord. You extend your lordship over all the earth. You have a kingdom that is coming and will reign over all the earth. You are a God who has incredible, penetrating moral clarity. You sort out which hand is right and which hand is left. You're also a God who comes close and who sends his son to die and who takes on our flesh and who takes on our sinfulness and who takes on our shame so that now we can be safe to come and know you because you have compassion. So, Father, draw many people to this true vision of you. We ask it in Jesus' name and by his Spirit. Amen.